Welcome again, everybody interested in Seiðr, history, craft and modern practice. So welcome to this lecture number 7 in a series of 8 videos. And my name is Annette. I am part of Scandinavian Center for Shamanic Studies, and I have for more than 30 years studied, practiced and taught Seder, this an old Nordic tradition of magic and shamanism. The title of today's video, I call it The Craft of Seder, because now it is time that we gather everything that we have learned and heard about in the first 6 videos and make more, should we say, practical magic use of it, put it together. And so applying all the historical and mythological knowledge and see how do we use it in a modern Seder here today. So these last 2 videos, there are two themes, 2 overall themes, and the one that we're going to only look at today, the craft of Seder, is as much as all the how to do a good Seder ritual, how to do a good Seder practice that we can do in such an online Magic University form when we are not doing an actual course. And then in number 8, the video next time, we will also have a theme that I call planting the staff in my own turf, in my own soil, in my own culture here and today. And that's sort of more like a personal process, or should we say, making the Seder my own, where we pull together all the last threads. There are 4 main elements in the craft of Seder that to focus on and to learn about, and they're the staff and the song and the saying. There's 1, and the seed, the Seiðr or Hjejle, and the spirits. In the last video, number 6 it must have been, we dealt a lot with the relationship with the spirits. And so we've sort of looked fairly well on that for now. So today I will especially focus on the staff, and then also the power of song and saying. Now these 4 elements, they're sometimes all, sometimes you use them all for both staff and seed and singing, but always the spirits. If you do a Seder, it all depends on what your topic is, but so it might only be a few of them, but you should know about all of them, from my point of view. So what we're going to look at now, the craft, the staff, the seed and the song, is it goes for all different kinds of doing Seder, whether you do it as a big group Seder, or you do it in a one-to-one session, or you're doing it alone, either in indoor or in the great outdoors. So for a start, the staff. It could be one like this. I personally, I would call staff is like my best friend in Seder, and I don't think I can overstate the importance or the role of the staff in Seder. Now, if we first look, well, there is we need to look at a few things in the sources and in the research and in the graves, in fact, before we can come to look more at what is a good side staff for me today, and where do I get it? In the text sources, we find 3 different words for the staff, and there's both staff and then there is Volo, that has also led to the name Völva for the practitioner, and or one of the words for practitioner. And then there is the word Gand, that can mean can both mean the staff and your spirit allies and your magic as such. And you have heard that word. One of the places it appears is in the mythical poem of Völuspá. In the long list of dwarves, there's also one called Gandalf. And you of course know that from the Lord of the Rings, where Tolkien lifted that word that was originally used for a dwarf onto Gandalf, as you know him now, and with his famous big staff that also contains a lot of his strong magic. So that's sort of already there. It tells us a lot about why the staff is so important and how many facets it has. In the written sources, we also remember how Thorbjörg, you saw it in video number 2, Thorbjörg, Little Völva, in the saga of Erik the Red, her staff, or rather the outward appearance of her staff was very detailedly described. Then there's also a short mentioning, I don't remember where it was, but anyway, it's sort of a short passage that tells about that there is they need to dig up an old grave, and it's in a saga, I think, and they find old blackened bones of a völva, and she had in the grave there is a mikil, a big side staff. Sometimes when Seiðr is mentioned in the written sources and the sagas and the poems, then the staff is not mentioned. And is that because the staff is understood, that you don't need to tell about it? And you could almost say the same sometimes about the Seiðr, the seed. Or is it because that it's not always that there is a staff at play? We can come back to that. Now, in the graves that we mentioned very shortly in video number 4, I think, I'll just say a little more. Let's first look at the grave of the Fyrkat woman. It's from like 980s or something, in the northern Jutland of Denmark. And in her grave, there are in fact 3 staves. So what more can you ask for? There is first just traces of a pretty long, slender wooden staff. There were, of course, only traces because she's been lying there for almost 1,000 years. But that would sort of have the measures like of this one here. And next to that, you can see in the picture, I think, there is a shorter iron rod that in fact is like a cooking spit. It sort of has like a blade in the end. And down by her feet, across, is a much shorter metal staff of sort. So there's a lot to think about there. I think we could also, like the long cooking spit of iron is also represented in the grave of the so-called pale lady, the pagan lady on the Isle of Man. You can also see it there lying at the right side of her body. In Birka, in the old Viking settlement with the great burial site, there are also more examples of staffs that are of iron. And they are generally much shorter than what I have shown you. Then they can be like, you can sort of see the remnants in the drawing here, but also some of them are no longer than this, or maybe a little bit longer. And both the fact that they are of iron and, well, if there were any of wood, then they probably disappeared a long time ago. But anyway, both the fact that they are made of iron and also that some of them have an outward appearance with sort of like a little bulb or something, a house you could call it, up at the top, a handle, has led to different ideas and theories that maybe, well, it's both speculated, those iron staves, were they used in Seder and how? And this thing that they almost look as a distaff, some of them have also led to ideas about that they were some kind of magic spinning tool used as, so that spinning or using that tool would be part of the, should we say, trance-inducing techniques used in Seder. So we will have now to look at both the material of iron, the element of iron, and also of spinning to be able to see, is this something we can use here and now? So let's first look at this whole thing about using iron. And now iron and the art of smithery or forgery is highly respected in a lot of shamanic cultures, and also in the old Norse tradition. In some places of Siberia, I remember that the shaman is told as being related to the blacksmith. And also in Old Norse, in the language there, a word for creating something is sometimes instead called to be smedet, to forge it, to what is it called? Doing smithery. A poet could sometimes be called in rimsmed, a rhyme smith. The dwarves were also known to be great magic blacksmiths, and their art also involved creating some of the more famous tools that we know, like Thor's hammer. And so, should we say, there's every reason to take it seriously if, should we say, the whole topic of iron or the art of being a blacksmith is introduced in a shamanic context or a spiritual one here. So if we try now looking then at the staffs, how would they work in practicing Seder the way that we have experienced it and developed it during the last 20-30 years? And there has been experiences collected, not by me. I have only used wooden staffs so far, and but I have been gathering other people's good and valid experiences. Now, one thing is that an iron staff is heavy, so the role of the staff as being your traveling companion when you're just also like walking from A to B, and it can be pretty far between those places. I mean, people were working extremely long distances in history, and then the iron staff is simply too, well, it doesn't serve that purpose, it's too heavy. Those that were shown in the graves, a lot of them are also, as I said, very short. And so if you sit on a hill that has sort of a chair form, at least where you're sitting sort of upright like this, then a staff that is 70 centimeters almost disappears down here. And personally, I would want it to be taller so I can rest more on it, so it can be supportive to me in all kinds of understandings. Now, if, on the other hand, that you were sitting cross-legged on a different kind of seat, and you place the staff here, see, now it has a sensible length according to my experience. So we can just wonder how they were used. It could also be the idea that the iron staff could be a symbolic, or should we say a grave version given to the dead one for their next steps, and maybe not equivalent to the one used in daily life, so to speak. Those I have talked with that has experiences with the iron staffs, some of them having been, should we say, new copies of that, should we say, cooking spit form that's sort of like as high as this, and with a spear-formed blade at the bottom. Now they tell me that the iron and the way energy flows through it, and thereby also by you, is very helpful for grounding, for keeping you centered around your task. And so it has both been people who used the staff if they were standing in a circle and singing in a Seiðr ritual, to sending your song into the middle hill where somebody else was using it to fly on. And so this thing of that it's grounding it, centering you and helping you stick with your mission, that's also especially, should we say, helpful if you are a person who very easily fly away, and that might feel that the wooden staff is more helpful for that. However, if you're a person like me who is very, should we say, earthy, then I will need the wooden staff. I am pretty good at grounding myself. So there are things to compare with the experiences we have with the wooden staves that we will come back to later. Yeah, for me personally, I would say I think I'll stick with the wooden staff. Now, what about these ideas that those short iron staffs were like distaffs, used as a magic spinning tool in Seder or for the vulva? We will have to look at that now. So first, we need to know a little bit about spinning to give a, should we say, a suggestion for an answer to this question. And let's just first look at what is a distaff. It's you see a picture here of both a distaff, and that might be, yeah, now I'll use this one again here. It's like a, should we say, a helping tool in the very old kind of spinning, before spinning wheels, but a way of spinning that's been used up through many countries and yeah, globally, I think, until last century, where you have two things. You have a drop spindle, that's just a stick with a whirl or a teenvægt, a weight on, and well, I better show that first. Then you set that in motion, the spindle, and then you start spinning. You see this invisible thread here, and then that keeps going around, but you need to have more wool to pull out your thread from. And that's where you have the distaff here, where all the prepared wool is sitting, and you keep pulling out the wool and keeping also your spindle in motion. And this is, it has its own rhythm. Now, if you're just sitting at home here and spinning with a drop spindle, then you may just have the prepared wool lying next to you someplace. You don't really need the distaff. That's your good helping friend if you are spinning as you go, which has been the way people have been doing it for thousands of years, because you couldn't just, should we say, do one thing at a time. Like, so spinning as you go, that would be something you did at the same time as, you would say, you were taking care, herding the sheep, or looking after the children. Or simply walking from A to B, from one village to the next. And so you could be useful. Idle hands were a no-go. And so there, the distaff is very helpful. But is it a rhythm, a monotony that is helpful if you at the same time want to do Seder? And here I'll have to tell you that I did a lot of spinning in my youth, a lot of spinning with the drop spindle, and also with the spinning wheel. And there can be a monotony in it. There can even be a bodily rhythm, but not enough that you could use it as, should we say, trance-inducing. And also you do need to keep a big part of your attention on the thread, even if you're very experienced, because otherwise the thread, it breaks or it gets kinky, and then you're going to have trouble when you come home. And because your job is to make strong, even thread. If I combine my experience with spinning and my experience with Seder, I say no. Spinning is not helpful in a Seder. When researchers come with an idea saying something that the Seiðr or the vulva were connected to magic spinning tools, and suggesting all this, this could both rest on the shape of those iron staffs, but it can also, should we say, rest on the ideas, the myths about the Norns or the goddesses of fate spinning the life thread, spinning the fate. One of the most popular ideas that's sort of connecting regarding the Norns and spinning is like the image of that one is spinning, one is measuring, and one is cutting. This image is not from Norse mythology, but rather from Greek. The only place in the Norse sources or stuff for the text where the Norns are mentioned together with spinning of threads is in the poem of Helgi Hunding's Bane. And there it is said about the Norns that they twisted fibers or spun threads of fate and fastened them in the midst of the moon's hall. And towards the east and towards the west they fastened ends. And the sister of death pulled an end towards the north and bade that this rope should hold forever. So, we have now looked at what we can glean from both, should we say, traces in words and traces in the earth about the staff in related to both iron and in related to spinning. And then we can start look at our own experiences that we've gathered from these last 30 years of modern Seder. The first many years where I was both learning as you go, so to speak, about Seder, and also when I was instructing people using the staff while sitting on the side Hjejle and doing Seder while we were singing for them, then I was very careful to say as little as possible about what they would expect from the staff, so that we could gather so many, should we say, reliable experiences as possible. And nevertheless, they were just told to not let go of the staff and remember their intent and stay in contact with their spirit allies, which sometimes is also in the staff. And it was remarkable, nevertheless, how many came back and told about how they had the experience of that the staff was turning into the tree of life, connecting the worlds and letting them see wide and far in all worlds, and also letting power streaming from way beyond, from the lower world to the upper world and back again, and all in all keeping them centered. Now this thing about the world tree is interesting, because the word völva, coming from the word volr, might sometimes indicate or suggest, or some scholars have suggested that maybe sometimes it's the practitioner, the völva itself, that becomes one with the staff, or even becomes the tree of life, so they are one. And that would also sort of fit with some of the experiences that we have. So again, it's a central role. It's a one that both has to do about visions and about keeping connection with all kinds of spirit beings and sources of wisdom and information, and the flow of power. Did I say that already? So again, it's like if I do, should we say, a kind of method, a shamanic method, where I might sit and also sit in a sea of songs, in a circle of songs, or even sing myself on a journey. But if I do it without the staff, then I personally would call that site inspired rather than a site. That's my take on it. But you will have to find out for yourself. Sometimes the wooden staff also shares with the iron staff this thing that it helps you to ground if you need that, or it helps you to remember your task. And usually I feel mostly like having the staff sitting solidly in the ground, and also having my feet on the ground. But sometimes when the site, should we say, involves that you are also journeying out over the land or in the other worlds, you might also experience that you ride on the staff. And then there's not much grounding in it until you come back. If you're doing, like going out on a vision quest done in the style of a solitary Seder, or inspired by Seder, and you want to bring your staff also, then you'll also find how great a value it has. Especially it becomes your traveling guide, your pathfinder, because even when it gets dark and uneven ground, then it's almost like a third eye. It helps you walk steadily and safely, and that will spill over in when you are then finally sitting out there with the staff. All the things that can run through it, and it will help you come back again safely. It's a lot of it. It's so simple, this thing of that if you have a staff, or let's say you've found a new one and you want to get to know it, and it's like a new friendship to start, then of course you start by introducing yourself, and I'd really like to be your friend, and can you tell me what your name is? Or maybe I can only see the outer side of you now. Will you reveal to me what's on the inner side? What's your soul, your spirit? How can we work well together? What do I need to learn to work well together with you? Is there anything special you demand or want of me for this a good cooperation? That could be something you could ask while walking with it, or while doing a shamanic journey, either singing style or with a drum as a help, and ask these questions. And that can take years to develop a real profound friendship. So that leads us to, how do you find a staff, or what is a good staff? Does it have any kind of characteristics you should look out for? I'd say the most important is it should be so solid so you can lean on it. And as you've heard, I also like that it's so tall that it can support me if I walk, and also on uneven ground, and it has to be a little higher, longer, in fact. And then that's one thing. And the other thing is that it is the inner side that's the important part, and not the outer side. Especially, no, except if you want to impress other people with how good it looks. I will say though here that I was given this other staff here, and I have it's sort of a friendly name. There's somebody else inside, but just for I often use this if I had to do some kind of performance, like a talk or something, or doing something that had to be on TV or something, because this is so photogenic, and it is so solid, and it's not, should we say, it's not touchy in the way that that it can take being seen and misinterpreted and everything. So it's also a very good comrade. This is rather simple. What kind of wood would you prefer? Is there something that is more, should we say, Norse or anything else? I think it's most important that maybe you share the same land. I'm not sure about this, but it could be something you could look for. For example, my other staff here, I better keep them both up here now so we can see. It's I was asked for doing my new, it's many years ago, doing my new side staff and asking the spirits how it should be. And then they said, hold dig til hyld, stick with elder. And then I had to go out and cut this branch of an elder tree in my garden. But other than that, I say there's no, should we say, types of wood or tree that's finer or more spiritual, for me anyway. The reason they said hyld to me, or elder to me, was because I already had a very special relationship with elder and the spirit of elder. So that's also something that's already residing here, the strengthening my connection to that spirit. So I'd say let the spirit show you, or one way then to find a staff is that you go out with a strong intention of wanting to be met by your staff, or stumble over it, or find it, and then just be very open with that wish you send out. If you go out in a forest or on open land or anything, and then see what offers itself. Somebody asked if it was more proper that a branch was then given, meaning broken by the tree itself, or if it would be okay to cut it off a tree. And there's not a general answer to that. That also would depend on what you are shown, maybe as just as strong signs from the forest or from whoever come along. I wish you the best of luck with finding a right staff, and then maybe later finding another staff for other occasions. Now we'll look at the role of song and poetry and words in the Seder performance, in the whole ritual. And if you remember again the example of Thorbjørg's Seder, because that was such a good teaching example, there were different kinds of songs at play here. First there was the spirit calling song, the one that in that case was called Varlukur. That was sung both in order to call the spirits and also to change the consciousness of certainly the one sitting on the hill in the middle who is doing the Seder, but we also heard that in fact that everybody present in the circle there got enchanted by the song. So that's one function that the song has there, and we'll get back to that. Then the next thing we hear is that she chanted the result of her Seder, the visions that she had brought back, and that brings us both to again to the power of a song, of singing, chanting rather than just saying, but also the whole role of poetry, the power of words. And so first I would like to look at the poetry. You see, the whole concept, idea of inspired poetry, it's like a main or a very central thing in both the Old Norse spirituality and also in a broader North European magic tradition of old, and I'm sure and in all kinds of other places in the world, but I'm not talking about them now. We concentrate here on Northern Europe and Scandinavia. So that meaning that skalds, bards, poets were held in high esteem. Also because it sort of goes together with the whole respect for the power of word themselves. But the whole thing about the inspiration, how poetry can sort of run from the deepest sources through you and be expressed in this Midgard, this middle world, for the good of people, so to speak. That is, amongst other places, told in the myth or the story about the poet's mead, we call it now. And I'm not going to tell the myth, but just shortly say that the poet's mead were brewed during many stages and in a lot of transformations, ended up being this magic drink that whoever drank it either could become a skald, a poet, or a very wise person. And it had a name, of course, and it was called Óðreria. When we spell it out and you see it spelled out, it's easy to see, to recognize the word Óðr that we met in the whole, should we say, investigation or of the flow of power. And also that you maybe remember that Óðr there is also part of Odin's name. So Óðreria, the poet's mead there, it means something that stirs the soul, or something that sets the mind in motion, or showers you with insight, inspiration, and consciousness, and makes it possible for you to put it into poetry, into words in this world. Should we say what I call the concept or the principle of the poet's mead talks to us about how also inspiration can be, should we say, we can make it grow, and we use it to ride on and to bring the wisdom and insight and power from the spirit world into this. It can be, should we say, we can make the inspiration grow, among other things, by singing the magic Seiðr songs, or in a more symbolically way, drinking of the poet's mead. However you get inspired, that also, of course, literally talks about the spirits being with you. Now, back to the side ritual itself. If we take Thorbjörg as the good example, then I say that I believe that she chanted what she saw and what she did, rather than she just spoke it. And that brings us back to this whole thing about why using poetry, why chanting when you could just speak in prose, as I do now. And that's because it's the best way to bring all the power and all the, should we say, the spiritual insights, to give it a form, to dress it in a language that can be heard by people here and now, in a way so that it reaches their heart and their soul. That's what poetry and song can do, rather than prose that first might be filtered through your intellectuality. So all kinds of, should we say, spiritual knowledge is, and also everything that you want that can transform and heal, it's so helpful that you present it in poetry or by music. So that's why I would always use singing when I can, rather than prose in a Seiðr, like coming back from the whole journey and telling what I've experienced and what there is of results to present, and what there might be of answers to people's questions. Yeah. There's also the other way about it. That's, or we could look at it in a different way. Is that we have, I think it's in the poem Groa Galder, that she is doing, like, should we say, a lot of good advice and even blessing through a galder. And she says that she did it in a place where her words could be heard in all the worlds. And you could say that the ritual or the sacred space that we make in a ceremony, that's where everything we say and do and chant there can be heard in all worlds. So that's where it's best to communicate with the spirits. And your words get extra power. That was short about poetry and inspiration. I'll also just say that the more you train it, I think I earlier said it's an easy muscle to train. This thing that you experience something, and then as you are experiencing it, especially if you're some kind of ecstatic state, then you can experience how it flows through you and come with, she would say, dressed in some words. You think, how did I think of that? Because that's inspiration. In more, maybe not in Kvæð or in Old Norse poetry tradition, but also in modern rap. You, for example, in a rap battle, there will be people there who are so trained in, should we say, the form of the verse, alliterations and rhythms, that when they tap into that source, then the new poems just flow through them, newborn, right there on their lips. Yeah, that's inspiration. Words themselves, speech, was also considered like a creative force or a creative power in both, the Old Nordic. We talk here about Norse, but also in a wider area of Europe. That's at least where I know it for sure, and not just in the Iron Age and early medieval times, but way up into the 16th, 17th century, where it even had, you would say, in court cases, a word weighed heavier than they do today. So you could say what in such a tradition that that really take words as a creative force, then words matter, because words may turn into matter, and that points of how carefully you handle or you use your words. And that's both in the Seder, it's in runic lore, it's in all kinds of spoken and song traditions, and also in court cases. So this points again to, I don't know if I said it before, sometimes we call the one sitting there in such a divinatory function of being prophesying or foretelling something. They can be called a soothsayer, in Old English at least, and that is related to the older Nordic word truth. It means truth sayer, and in that way that what they say there on the seat is the truth. It becomes the truth because they say it. And that really puts a responsibility on you in order to be careful with your words. This also means that, for example, healing words or blessing, prayers are also, should we say, they can be very, very strong words, and so the skill of using them well is good to learn. Now, this brings us to a very specific way of using words in the Norse tradition. And as many other things in the sagas, and there they dealt with conflict, because the power of words then can also be used to offend people, to insult them, especially on their honor. And there was a widespread tradition for doing like short verses or texts or carvings that would be defamatory, so that people could lose their honor. And that is called nid. It's the same word in Norse and modern Norwegian and Danish and also Welsh, I think it exists in. And it means words intended to insult or harm somebody else. It's a weapon. And it was considered using nid towards another person, if it was like a pretty serious one, it was considered, should we say, a crime, or it hook. What could I call it? And a hurt, a wound. It would consider wounding as seriously as raping or even as killing, and should we say the punishment was more or less the same, because if somebody had nid used against them, they had the right to, and thereby almost the duty to kill the one who made the nid. There's an example of such a nid text or nid verse. And do you remember the bishop who destroyed the good relation between Kudran and the Landvættir? And such a nid verse was made against him and somebody else called Thorvald. And it sounds like this, just in English translation. The bishop has given birth to 5 children. Thorvald is the father of them all. That was a serious one. And you can also see the style here. It's terse and it's straight as an arrow. Yeah. Today we don't have a conscious knowledge or tradition of Nith, but still I would say a lot of people use it. And that's what we would call hate speech. And the difference here is that I think most people count on it should have no consequences for them when they use it. And that was not so back 1,000 years ago. We usually call upon our freedom of speech. But if you combine freedom of speech with this deep respect for the creative power of words, then maybe some people would consider their talk a little more careful. This, of course, points to, so what about today? I'd first say about words, this thing of careful use of words, meaning that you are also, should we say, you take care when you frame your intent for a Seder or another kind of going out and asking omens or good advice from the nature spirits, or doing any kind of other shamanic work or healing work or anything, that you take care that your words are very clear and that they can't be, should we say, have a double meaning. I think that's why I've both really paid attention to this piece of history here about the respect for the power, the creative power of words, and used it in all my shamanic career, I should say. But I've also again and again seen in modern people's shamanic work, including our Seder, that if you have a sloppy kind of intent, you might either get a sloppy kind of experience, or you might experience that the spirits understood your intent in a different way than you meant it. Yeah. So it's good to train clear intent. Now to the song or the songs in our Seder work practice. And before we just revisit Thorbjörg once again, then just to see our work here in the broader shamanic context, both, should we say, in space and time, because should we say, singing and songs and singing and singing and singing into monotonous ecstasy is a trait in many shamanic traditions all over the world through all times. And it's this big family of songs we can also see our side songs in. Let's just again visit Thorbjörg and her Seder, where the song that was used, that was called Vatlokur. It was also said more than once that it was fröði, that it was a piece of skill, of knowledge, that it takes some time to learn, and also that it's pretty likely, I would say, that one was with words. We don't know which they were. There are no recorded Seder songs left for us, written down, I mean, not recorded. So in this whole recreation, or as we see, new life of a new Seder tradition, then I try to we could turn to other of the Nordic old magic song traditions, and some of them are still alive today. And the best example I know of is in the Finnish Baltic area, the runo laulo, what we call rune songs. And it's not because, it doesn't mean that they're chanting runes. It's a rune in its deepest meaning of something sacred, something secret. Again, something you need to it's sort of something you need to learn. And so I've taken inspiration from those traditions. But anyway, that leads us pretty quickly to consider our own new Seder songs. What works? What is a good Seder song? What have we learned through those last 30 years of experimenting? And the thing is that I think it's important to remember that the demands that we have for a song and nowadays, and that the song have of us, is different than 1,000 years ago, and it counts for also how we prepare the whole Seder ritual. Because back then, people were so trained in learning long poems and songs by heart, and they would show up, or they would until the tradition started breaking, and we hear that, for example, Gudrija was the only one who remembered the song. But we would otherwise expect that people had a huge repertoire of songs for all kinds of purposes. We don't do that today. So one of the should we say the characteristics, I think, for when we look at what constitutes, is that a word, a good Seder song, one that fulfills all the purposes. And one is that it should be rather simple in meaning easy to learn, but so that we can all learn it before we go into, in fact, the place, the space where we do the Seder. And it's really good to have at least 3 or 4 good, simple ones you can use for different occasions, and have them in your song bag. But we should also remember that side songs, even today, are fröði. They are songs that we know, and we know them precisely before we step into the side ritual. So, should we say intuitive singing, that where we just let the song grow from a common intent, for example. It may work for you in your new Seder, but it's then way different from the ones that the whole tradition was built up around. And I myself did in the first years sometimes both use should we say a learned song, and sometimes like this intuitive song. And I have landed on only using the learned ones. The only time where I thought that really worked, that was in a group that had worked so tightly together a whole weekend, and had just returned in from a full moon ritual, and now did a midnight Seder. So the song is fröði. Now, so rather simple, easy to learn, and then also having some kind of basic, or should we say, you can see what I show you, a basic rhythm that is has the same dependent monotony that you can depend on, like when you're walking or something, that allows you to, even if you should get sort of rather ecstatic and sing all over the place, then you can easily find the rhythm and come back into the teamwork, because the Seiðr song in a group is teamwork. We listen to the others. Our voice is one of many voices, and we keep we remember our intent. The melody that is used is preferably, should we say, one that allows easily or even invites for harmonies, that people can sing second or third voices, or it can maybe even be used as a canon, so that we get into this sea of voices. And even there, if you should get should we say so ecstatic that you're forgetting what you were there, then you will remember, and you can easily find the, should we say, the basic bones of the melody again. And there I say melody because I think that words in a Seiðr song today are difficult because they need to be so well related to the task of the one sitting on the side hjell that they don't instead disturb. And I haven't yet found any that do, except one I have for myself privately. So a melody is also fine because it is really the power of that kind of a singing that opens the doors to the other realities. It also means when you choose your tune there, that it's not one with long, should we say, holes of silence in them, because that can be felt in when you sit in the middle on the hill. And then it could be some of you now think, I'm not very good at singing, or I can only sing like a deep alto or something. And that's also why the song has to be easy. And that's also why it's good always to have a lead singer, but one that can sort of add a little here, and if there are any holes, fill them out. But we'll get back to that in our next video. But what I want to say here is that the song is, the tones are on a level, in a height, that's comfortable for most in the circle to sing, because you may be singing for a quarter of an hour, 20 minutes, the same melody without stopping. And when did you last do that? This requires that you also get into the state that the song itself helped you with, where the song starts singing you rather than you sing the song. That may be another word for ecstasy. So for me, I'm also sort of a convenience alto, I think somebody has told me once, because I feel I have more power and I can keep on for much, much, much longer time if I can sing in the, should we say, in sort of a middle alto level. And then the wonderful thing is, if that, should we say, the tune is set there, then anybody who are more comfortable singing bass or soprano, they can just put their voices there, and there we have the sea of voices. So these are just sort of, should we say, tips and tricks, or no, I'd rather say those are the guidelines I keep coming back to when, for example, I hear a song and people say, would that be good as a Seder song? Yeah. So that may lead you to ask, finding, where do we find new Seder songs? I think you may be inspired by things you hear on the net, maybe especially by singers and bands who take inspiration from all kinds of Viking stuff and old Nordic traditions. It could also be more, should we say, more classical, can that be called classical folk singing, and way of singing. The way of singing also usually means that you don't sing carefully to make it pretty. You sing your heart out, so to speak. because then it comes back. But that you can do that for a long time if you have a clear intent and you get into sort of this mode where the song sings you. But there's another more, should we say, shamanic way, or original, or old, or timeless way of finding new songs, whether it's for your Seiðr work or it's for something else. That is that you go out where there are a lot of songs, or a drone like a drone tone, and that can both be, should we say, if the weather is like it was here yesterday. There was like over the trees all day in the great big wind. And if you walk out there with the hope of being found by a song, then you might, and you say, for example, a song for a divination Seder, and then you start listening. Then you might hear something. Maybe that's just two tones in between the roar of trees. You start singing them. And then you go on, and it might add up to a song. It can be very simple. And if you don't have a big forest full of strong wind, then just as good, in fact, are vacuum cleaners. Like if you are, it also has a wonderful drone that often has harmonies. That's from one, should we say, end to the other. And in between, you'll find things like the drum. If you are just drumming and asking for a song and listening, especially if there's a good, should we say, many voices in that drum, then you just keep on going and start singing with it. But sometimes if you don't have a drum or a forest, and you may not have a vacuum cleaner, what do I know, then you can also simply go out in heavy traffic, especially if there are vans, lorries, big trucks. They can have this wonderful, deep, multi-voiced harmony, and the same, in fact, with airplanes. Whatever works that will make you find your tune, and then you just keep singing it until it's comfortable. How does it sound, you may ask? And I'm not going to give, should we say, a real example of some of the songs we have used, because for me it's important that the sacred magic songs, they stay within the sacred magic space, so that we, so to speak, keep our tools sharp, that they don't get watered out by being used for other things, and online is a big, vast place. Otherwise, there's again, in Thorbjørg's case, in her story, I've said it before, that it was said that everybody present thought that they had never heard a fairer voice. When Guðrið, she sang the side song so well, as if there had been a lot of other people. And a key word here being present, because they were enchanted by the song. And this happens also to us when we stand there and sing for a good purpose. We are moved by the song. And it seems beautiful to us. But then, even with Guðrið, if we had recorded it, if that had been possible, and played it afterwards in a different setting, like on a cafe, or when we'd been talking about accounts or something, then it may have sounded just flat, because we were not betwixt and between. And so this serves us to take care of taking good care of our songs. That they are beings, they are wild beings, often with a strong personality, and will let you know if they don't care for what you did to them. Yeah, but if you're lucky, then maybe you and the song becomes good friends, and it will stay with you for a long time. And then even it turns out it's so good. We have had quite a few examples in our new tradition here. It works so well that we, within, should we say, a network, can teach it to new groups and new people, and there a new tradition is born. And this has been wonderful to be part of, or to see these new, getting our song back filled with new good Seiðr songs with different characteristics. Today we have looked at some of the important elements in the craft of Seiðr. The staff, and the inspired poetry, the power of song, and the power of words. And in the very last video, on number 8, we will look at the, should we say, the last elements of the craft of Seiðr and put it together in how to put up a good Seiðr ritual. Together with how then I can plant my staff in my own soil. We offer this series of lecture videos for free, and that's because we want to make all this stuff about the Seiðr tradition as available as possible to as many as possible. But however, if you feel you can afford it, and you feel you've gained and learned something from from these videos here, we are very thankful for any amount of donation that you would feel like giving. There is a link here below the video where you can see it. And we should also give thanks to you who have already given donations. Thank you very much. And see you all next time.